Why do some people voluntarily choose solitude? The answer might surprise you. What if solitude isn't loneliness, but strength disguised in silence? Could choosing to be alone actually be the most powerful decision for personal freedom? Welcome to StoicCraft, where timeless Stoic philosophy meets modern life strategies. Today, explore why some people choose to walk alone, not as a rejection of society, but as an embrace of clarity, discipline, and inner strength. You've seen them, that person sitting alone in a cafe sipping coffee with a book open, but barely turning the pages, or the one walking through the park at sunset, earbuds in eyes steady face, unreadable. Maybe it's the colleague who always eats lunch alone, or that friend who cancels plans, not just once, but often just to spend time by themselves. And the thought sneaks in, are they okay? Because somewhere along the way we learned that being alone is a problem to be fixed. That solitude equals sadness, that someone who chooses to be alone must be lonely or left out, or maybe even broken it. Makes sense in a way. We're wired for connection from early childhood. We're told to play nice, make friends, work in teams. Our entire social fabric is built on being part of a group. So when someone steps outside of that rhythm, when they seem content in their own company, it feels off. We don't quite know what to do with it, and often we assume the worst. Maybe they're socially awkward. They must not have many friends. I wonder if they're depressed. Rarely do we think maybe they're exactly where they want to be, because let's be honest, in our culture, solitude isn't just misunderstood. It's seen as a red flag. We're constantly told to put yourself out there, to network, to build your brand. If you're not sharing, updating, replying, if you're not visible, you start to feel invisible. It doesn't help that so much of our self-worth is now measured publicly: likes, follows, comments, seen by others, validated by strangers. In that kind of environment, someone who chooses to unplug is often seen as disconnected, or worse, irrelevant. But solitude, it's not a signal of weakness. It's a reset, a refusal to be consumed. And in that visibility trap, solitude becomes suspicious, like you've stepped out of the race, like something's gone wrong. But what if it hasn't? What if solitude is not a sign of lack, but of presence? Some people choose to be alone, and not because they're broken or bitter, not because they can't find anyone to be with, but because solitude gives them something that constant company never could: clarity, depth, peace. They don't need more noise in their life. They've had enough of pretending, enough of surface level chatter, enough of being on. Solitude is where they can breathe, where they remember who they are. Maybe it's not the absence of connection. Maybe it's the beginning of something truer. So let's pause before we judge, before we diagnose, before we assume. Let's ask a better question. What if solitude isn't a sign of weakness, but of strength? So here's the real question. Why do some people choose to be alone on purpose? Because when you strip away the assumptions, there's a kind of courage in solitude. Strength isn't always displayed in public victories. Often it's built silently in solitude. Solitude allows freedom, not from people, but from distraction, giving you the space to build resilience from within. Not the lonely kind that sneaks up on you in an empty room, but the kind you step into deliberately, fully awake. We tend to think of solitude as something passive, something that just happens to people. But for many, it's not a state they fall into. It's a space they create on purpose repeatedly. It's an act of carving out mental clarity from a world that never stops talking. And what's really surprising, it's not always about needing time to recharge. It's not always about introversion or overwhelm. Sometimes it's just about wanting more honesty in the day, more space to think, more silence between the noise. Solitude gives you something rare in the modern world: control over your attention. No one else shaping your thoughts, no one else setting your rhythm. It's a chance to step back from the performance and ask, what do I actually think? What do I actually feel? For some people, solitude isn't about retreating from the world. It's about returning to themselves. They're not trying to disappear, and they're trying to reconnect with what matters, with what's real, with who they are when no one's watching. That's a radical idea in a world obsessed with constant contact, where connection is currency, where if you're not available, you're seen as unavailable, and if you're not surrounded by people, you must be missing something. But what if you're not? What if you're protecting something? There's a line from Marcus Aurelius that says, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." And that's what solitude really is for some people. A retreat not from others, but from everything that pulls them away. The Stoics valued solitude as a practice, not an escape. Marcus Aurelius often retreated into his own mind for reflection, using silence as a weapon to sharpen his focus. Seneca taught that being alone helps you know yourself, strengthening your mind against external influence. From who they are, a place to realign, a place to remember. This isn't about becoming a hermit. It's not a rejection of connection. It's just intentional space to hear your own thoughts without interference, to exist without being edited, to live even briefly without performing. And once you realize that, the question shifts. It's no longer why would anyone choose to be alone. It becomes how could they not. So, in this video, we're going to take that question seriously. We'll look at solitude not as a social failure, but as something richer, deeper, even philosophical. We'll explore why some people choose to be alone, and why that choice might be one of the most human things we can do. And maybe, just maybe, this isn't about withdrawing from life. Maybe it's about stepping fully into it without all the noise, because sometimes the loudest thing in the world is your own silence, asking to be heard. Let's start with something that might surprise you. Solitude isn't a modern anomaly. It's an ancient pursuit. Long before smartphones and crowded calendars, people were already seeking stillness, but not because they were antisocial, because they were after something deeper. Take the Stoics, for example. Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor, wrote about solitude constantly, not as isolation, but as an internal refuge. Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. He wasn't talking about running away from life. He was talking about stepping inward into clarity. To the Stoics, solitude wasn't withdrawal, it was discipline, a way to return to reason when the world felt chaotic. They believed peace doesn't come from controlling the outside world, it comes from mastering your inner one, and solitude was the environment where that mastery could happen. Seneca, another Stoic philosopher, once said, "A man is unhappy though he rule the world if he does not consider himself supremely happy." In other words, no amount of social praise or external success matters if you're not at peace with yourself. And how do you find out if you are? You get quiet, you go inward, you spend time alone. And then there's Epictetus, who taught freedom comes from learning what's in your control and letting go of the rest. Solitude in that light becomes a kind of liberation. No distractions, no performance, no pretending, just you. And what's real, this idea wasn't unique to Stoicism across the world. In a completely different tradition, the Buddha sat under a tree in silence until he found truth monks. Across cultures retreat into solitude, not to reject humanity, but to understand it better. The quiet isn't punishment, it's practice, even though centuries later in the American wilderness. The Stoics valued solitude as a practice, not an escape. Marcus Aurelius often retreated into his own mind for reflection, using silence as a weapon to sharpen his focus. Seneca taught that being alone helps you know yourself, strengthening your mind against external influence. Strength isn't always displayed in public victories. Often it's built silently in solitude. Solitude allows freedom, not from people, but from distraction, giving you the space to build resilience from within. Wasn't escaping society, he was studying it from a distance. I went to the woods, he wrote, because I wished to live deliberately. His solitude wasn't passive. It was investigative, a way of paying attention. And there are more modern echoes, writers like Virginia Woolf, who famously claimed the need for a room of one's own, or the poet Rainer Maria Rilke, who saw solitude not as a burden, but as a kind of spiritual necessity. Solitude in these traditions wasn't a luxury, it was essential. It was the container for thought, for virtue, for transformation. You weren't just sitting alone. You were sharpening your mind, your spirit, your understanding of the world. Even in Christian monasticism, the Desert Fathers retreated not to escape people, but to confront the self. The silence was a crucible, a mirror, a place where illusions fell. Away in Japanese Zen practice, silence is not emptiness. Its presence. Meditation halls are quiet, not because nothing is happening, but because everything is in that stillness. Awareness expands. The world slows down enough for truth to surface. So, when someone today chooses solitude, not forever, but intentionally, they're walking in the footsteps of millennia of seekers. They might not wear robes or chant mantras, but the gesture is the same: step back, tune, and return with something real in. A time where attention is fractured and distraction is monetized. Solitude becomes a sacred rebellion. It's a way of reclaiming your mind, not from the world, but from the noise within it. So when you see someone sitting alone on a bench in a room, on a mountain, they might not be disconnected at all. They might be the most connected person in the room. And that's the quiet power of chosen solitude. It's not the absence of others, it's the presence of self, if philosophy gives us the why behind. Solitude psychology helps us understand the how it works on us, how it affects our minds, and why for some people it just feels right. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, once said something that cuts to the core: loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. Let that sit for a second. Being alone and being lonely, they're not the same thing. You can be surrounded by people and feel completely invisible, and you can be sitting by yourself completely content because you're in alignment with your own inner world. That's a big shift in perspective. Some people crave solitude, not to escape connection, but to escape disconnection. They're tired of the shallow, scattered versions of closeness that dominate so much of modern life. Small, talk over stimulation conversations that never go deeper than the surface it wears on you. Psychologists have long studied, and this one of the most well-known voices is Susan. Kane, author of Quiet, she describes how introverts aren't shy or antisocial. They simply draw energy from within. Being alone isn't draining for them, it's restorative. And even if you're not an introvert, solitude has proven psychological benefits. It increases creativity, improves focus, helps emotional regulation. People who spend regular intentional time alone tend to have a stronger sense of self, not because they avoid others, but because they've learned how to listen to themselves. In fact, a study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people who can tolerate and even enjoy being alone often display higher levels of emotional intelligence and self-discipline. They aren't fleeing from life, they're managing it with more awareness. It's like emotional maintenance. You pull away to reset. You reflect, you recharge, and when you re-enter the world, you're more grounded. And here's where it gets even more interesting. People who are comfortable being alone often have stronger boundaries. They're less likely to lose themselves in relationships. They don't depend on others to define who they are. That's not cold. That's clarity. What we often overlook is that solitude doesn't just restore, it reveals. When you're alone, the noise fades. You begin to notice how much of your thinking is borrowed, how much of your behavior is shaped by who's around you. Alone, you get to ask, is this me or just the version of me I perform? This is why solitude can be such a powerful tool for self-inquiry. Journaling, walking without a destination, sitting with a cup of tea, and letting your thoughts unspool. These small acts aren't passive, they're intentional. They make space for truth. Even extroverts, who naturally thrive in company, benefit from moments of solitude, not because they need to escape people, but because everyone needs to rest. The part of themselves that performs solitude is the space where even the most social person gets to be human without an audience. There's also a growing field of research around deliberate solitude, the idea that regularly choosing to be alone can strengthen resilience, reduce stress, and even improve decision-making. In other words, solitude isn't just neutral, it's nourishing. The people who choose it regularly often have a strong sense of purpose. They aren't wasting time. They're investing in alignment, in clarity, in peace. And that's what many people miss. When they look at someone sitting quietly on their own, they assume absence. What they're really seeing is presence. Here's the part that really flips the script. Strength isn't always displayed in public victories. Often it's built silently in solitude. Solitude allows freedom, not from people, but from distraction, giving you the space to build resilience from within. In today's world, choosing solitude isn't just misunderstood, it's practically rebellious. We live in a culture that worships connection, the kind you can measure, monetize, and post about. There's a pressure to always be available, always be updating, always be on. In this kind of environment, solitude feels almost suspicious, like you're breaking some unspoken rule. We've been conditioned to think that a full life is a busy one, that silence is awkward, that if you're not engaging, you're missing out. But let's be honest, what exactly are we afraid of missing? The truth. Most of what we're bombarded with isn't meaningful. It's noise, notifications, opinions, algorithms, content designed to keep us scrolling, not thinking. And somewhere in all of that, solitude becomes not just a relief, but a form of resistance. When you choose to be alone, you're doing something that runs completely counter to the pace of the world. You're saying, I don't need constant input to feel alive. I don't need an audience to exist. That's radical. It's why more people are turning to silent retreats, Digital detox is minimalism. The idea isn't to escape the world permanently, it's to remember what life feels like when it's quiet, when it's yours. Think about a Vipassana retreat, 10 days of silence. No phone, no talking, just sitting with your thoughts. Thousands of people do this willingly every year. Why? Because somewhere deep down we know we've lost something, and the noise and solitude might help us find it again. Even artists and thinkers, people who are wildly expressive, often disappear into solitude to do their deepest work, not because they're hiding, but because that's where clarity lives, in the quiet, in the space between demands. But this choice doesn't always look glamorous. It can feel lonely at first. The world won't applaud you for pulling back. It won't validate your silence. If anything, it will question it. That's the cost of stepping off the treadmill. You lose visibility, but you gain vision. We don't often talk about the toll of constant connection, but it's real burnout. Anxiety or loss of self. When you're always reacting, always plugged in, you stop being, you just perform. And slowly you forget who you were before the performance began. Solitude interrupts that cycle. It gives you space to stop performing, to start being again. Even our language reflects the discomfort with solitude. Words like loner or recluse carry a sting. We rarely use them with admiration. But why? Why is it strange to want your own space? Your own rhythm, your own mind back? The truth is, solitude threatens the status quo. It steps outside the algorithm. It refuses the constant update, the curated identity, the reactive spiral, and for that reason it's powerful. It's also deeply human. Every culture has had its seekers, its sages, its quiet walkers who wandered into the hills not to get away, but to go deeper. We don't always recognize them in today's world because they don't post about what they're doing. They just live it. So when you see someone take that step, not just into physical solitude, but into mental solitude, pause before you project loneliness onto them. They may be walking a very old path. One carved by clarity, by presence, by peace. They haven't disconnected from the world. They've reconnected with themselves. Let's go back to that person sitting alone in the cafe. Same table, same quiet focus, same air of solitude, but maybe now you see them differently. Maybe they're not lonely. Maybe they're listening to something the world keeps trying to drown out. The truth is, solitude doesn't ask for attention. It doesn't perform, it just is. And the people who choose it, they're not withdrawing, they're returning to something quieter, yes, but also something truer. When you spend time alone, you start to hear yourself more clearly, not your fears, not your to-do list, not the version of you shaped by expectations, just you, the one beneath the noise. And that's why some people choose solitude, not because they've given up on the world, but because they've finally stopped trying to be everywhere in it. They've stopped bending themselves to fit every social cue, every conversation, every demand. They've chosen instead to be with themselves fully and without apology. There's power in that, a kind of soft defiance. Because when you no longer fear being alone, you stop chasing the wrong kinds of company. You stop performing for approval. You begin to choose relationships that feel real, not just available. You begin to speak only when you have something worth saying, and you listen more to the world, to others, to yourself. Marcus Aurelius said the soul is a retreat, and he was right, but not just in a philosophical sense, in a practical, lived way. Solitude can be a home, not a hiding place, but a place of return, and that return changes you. It strips away the layers, the posturing, The Stoics valued solitude as a practice, not an escape. Marcus Aurelius often retreated into his own mind for reflection, using silence as a weapon to sharpen his focus. Seneca taught that being alone helps you know yourself, strengthening your mind against external influence. The exhaustion of trying to be someone for everyone in its place, something quieter, emerges not a new self, but the one you've been too busy to hear. So maybe solitude isn't about escaping the world. Maybe it's about finally arriving in it whole, unfiltered, and awake, because when you can sit with yourself and feel at peace, you've found something most people spend their entire lives chasing. Solitude doesn't just slow things down, it sharpens them. It's where vague feelings become real thoughts, where the background hum of pressure fades, and you finally get to ask, what do I want? Who am I? When no one's looking, in the silence, truth surfaces. And here's what's truly beautiful: solitude doesn't mean you don't need people. It just means you don't need everyone. It helps you choose more intentionally who you let in, who you listen to, who gets your time, and who doesn't. That's not isolation, that's discernment, because the goal isn't to be alone forever. It's to know yourself well enough that you're never lonely in your own company, and when that happens, every connection you make becomes more real. Every conversation goes deeper. You no longer grasp for belonging, you offer it rooted in whole. Solitude, then, is not the end of connection, it's the foundation of it. So here's the quiet truth: some people choose to be alone because that's where their clarity lives, their creativity, their courage, not in the noise, not in the crowd, but in the stillness they've learned to trust. And maybe the world could use a little more of that, not because we don't need each other, but because we need to know ourselves before we can truly show up for anyone else. That's the gift of solitude, and it's waiting quietly for anyone willing to listen. So maybe solitude is where clarity begins, but clarity alone isn't enough. You can sit in stillness for hours, see yourself fully, understand exactly what needs to shift, and still stay stuck, because nothing changes until you do. If this video helped you see solitude in a new light, consider liking it. It lets me know this kind of content matters. And if there's someone in your life who might need a little peace, feel free to share this with them. And when you're ready to take that next step, the one that moves you from knowing to doing, click on the video right here. Nothing changes until you do this. It's not about doing more, it's about starting differently. I'll meet you there. If this resonates with you, subscribe to StoicCraft for timeless strategies drawn from Stoic wisdom. Like and share this message with anyone who views solitude as weakness. Remember, solitude is not isolation, it's preparation.